Good afternoon, friends. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this month's session on aging well, and I'd like to introduce Ted Taylor, who is a member of Yardley Meeting and also is the Director of Pastoral Care Services at Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas.
Something like that. That's a long name.
Hamilton.
Yeah, there's a lot of names now.
Yes. And I've heard Ted talk before, and I'm delighted to have him share his wisdom with us today. So, thank you.
Great. Thanks for having me, friends, and appreciate being in worship with you all this first day as well. So, and thanks for the invitation, Susan. I appreciate, this is kind of one of my passions. I guess if a Quaker can be evangelical, I'm evangelical about sharing this news. And news about, I guess, maybe the best way to talk about it is making sure that we have our wishes and our values honored as we enter the last phase of our life. I brought with me some packets, and I think I brought just enough, but if you need to share, please do that. And then I can send all of the information that's in there, most of it, electronically to you later. But I think we have enough. And if you want extra, you can. My card is in there. Just shoot me a quick email and let me know, and I can send that to you as well. The other thing, when we're done, I brought a few things out of my library in the office, a couple of books that I found really helpful in this area, as well as some extra pamphlets of some of this material. So I'm going to be speaking about goals of care, and I'm going to be speaking about two main documents that can help us have those goals honored and our values honored at times where we'll be entering this season of life, at the end of life, and especially how medical care can be focused on aligning with our values. In doing that, I thought it might be interesting just to kind of warm up, and I guess the sense I have for this morning is going to be about a half hour of me just kind of talking, and then another good 20 minutes of us having some dialogue. So feel free, even while I'm talking, if there's a burning question, Susan, if it's okay, we can add to it, but otherwise there will be a lot of dialogue time at the end of this. But what I thought we'd do before I
want to reassure people that by doing it this way, we will videotape the first part. We will not videotape during the questions and answers, so you can rest assured that your questions can be personal and they won't be shared to the whiteboard.
Yeah, there'll be some privacy involved in all that. And this might be good too in this this first exercise that'll kind of get us warmed up on this topic, is that the camera's on me, not on you. So I'm going to ask you all to raise your hands as I go through some of these cards. Now this is a what's called Go Wish, so Go Fish, Go Wish game. It's produced and has been used in several of the communities that I'm working in trying to help us define what would our wishes be. So there's plenty of ways to play this game. The way I'm going to play it this morning, just for a couple minutes, is to just pick a card out of the deck and read it. And I'm going to ask you to raise your hand, first off, if what I read to you would be something that is imperative, a value that would be so important to you that would have to be at the top of the list. And then I'll ask for hands for those who think they're not sure, or maybe this would be down a little lower on the list. And then we can raise hands for those who say that's really not important to me at all. And these are all kind of end-of-life values. So I'm just going to pick one. So the first one is, as I enter this, these are all about entering this last stage of life. To be able to help others. Would that be the most important for some people? Most important thing at all, okay? Maybe is important, and then not really important, kind of low on the list. Okay, good. There's no right or wrong answer. This is just to help us start thinking. To maintain my dignity. Most important. kind of middle importance, dignity, and lowest importance. Okay. Middle of the deck here. To have my family with me, most important. Of some middle importance.
What do you mean with me if you're dead?
Well, this is as you're getting to be dead, not quite dead. That's a good question, but no, this is on that last part of the journey. So yes, to have your family with you.
With, like, I was thinking, like, we're all buried together when we go. That's what
I would interpret this to mean, as I am very ill and or dying, would it be important to have my family around me at that time? So if yes, very, very important, somewhat important, and not really important at all. Perfect. Because there are some of us who have families that we'd want to be far away. To have someone who will listen to me. Very, very important. Somewhat important. Not really important at all. Okay, I'm going to do one more. But you can kind of get the gist of this. And there's a lot of them.
catching on.
Yeah. So this is pre-death. Okay. To trust my doctor. Very, very important. Somewhat important. And not so important. So you can see there's a lot that goes into understanding what your values might be and how individual they all are. I mean, you could have maybe assumed that everyone would be thinking the same way you did about some of these key issues, and there's maybe 30 more of them in this deck. But it's kind of interesting to see that we all have a path that's unique to us, and goals that might be unique to us. And so when the way our healthcare system works, when it works really well, it's great, but it still is a system, and it has some assumptions about how things are supposed to go. And you can imagine that sometimes those assumptions aren't exactly the things that were important to you. You kind of get into the factory of healthcare and move along at its pace. And if you hadn't thought ahead of time about where you might want to step off of the conveyor belt, or to have it directed in certain ways, things will just go their own way. So that's some of my work at the hospital in Hamilton, New Jersey, is to help people have a voice about where on this healthcare system's journey how they want to participate in it and how they want to make it fit their values. So the green folder, I'm going to make sure I have my watch here so I know what time. About 20 minutes to talk about two things in these green folders. So these are folders that I hand out at our hospital to patients and families who want to know a little bit more about how to document and ensure that their values are honored as they enter the phase of end of life. It's going to be kind of New Jersey centric, since that's the side of the river that I'm from, but I did also make some copies of one document that is very much focused in Pennsylvania. We'll talk about that in a second. It's this little pink one that I set aside outside of the packet. So in the packet, a couple things. One is my card, so if you need to be in touch with me, feel free. There's a yellow sheet that talks just about almost everything I'm going to talk about with more detail, kind of a question and answer. So feel free to go back to this and review it. I think some of the information here is really well done. I can't claim to have written it, but I can claim to have stolen it and reprinted it a lot. What I'd like to talk to you all first is about the two documents that are on the back of that yellow sheet. One has the name of my health system emblazoned on the front, but it doesn't mean that it can't be used anywhere. It is a very simple advanced directive document. Well, I've been using that word a lot. As I say advanced directive, is everyone familiar when I say that? Yes, maybe no. So good, right. So I'm using jargon that might not be very clear. Advanced directive is a document that is a legal written statement that kind of does two things. First off, it can name who you want to speak for you when you're unable to speak for yourself. And it comes out of this idea in bioethics that we all have the right to choose how we want to be cared for, who touches our body, and how our bodies are treated. If you can't say that, then you get to name somebody who can speak that for you and can advocate for your values. So one thing that an advance directive will do is to set that out ahead of time. So it will list person, and if that person can't, persons that could follow them, to be your voice. And you might not be able to speak either because of an illness or because of a treatment that you're receiving. So if you're intubated, often you are anesthetized, so you're not going to be able to talk. So that's when that would kick in. The other part of an advance directive, beyond what I would sometimes call the proxy directive, you naming that person to be your healthcare agent, is the written directive. And sometimes people talk about living wills, so you probably heard that term. That's what we're talking about in that part of the advance directive, is the written down part of what's important to you. Again, this little couple page white document, and the one I'm going to use a little bit more when we're talking right now is called 5 Wishes. It's an advance directive document that shares some of those key ideas of advance directives. Important thing, and if you look through this, we're not going to take the time to read through it, but the power that that proxy has is pretty intense and amazing. They can choose doctors for you. They can choose medical treatments for you. They can start you on treatments, and they can take you off treatments. They can enroll you in certain healthcare institutions, move you across the country for the best treatment, or move you back to where they think you need the treatment that you would want. So it's important to pick people, again, that know this about you and can advocate for your values. Sometimes it might not be a family member. Sometimes it might be that those families that we didn't want around us will not be the people that we'd want to list to be making decisions for us. And that happens in some families. Either spouses or children just don't share the same values, and they might not be able to follow up and advocate in the best way. Actually, in the parking lot before worship, I got a call from a woman who had just received this green packet over the weekend. She is the care provider, live-in care provider for a woman who's now in rehab, and this woman had said, I want to name you as my proxy. And so the woman on the phone with me was saying, how do we do this? And part of me, my spidey sense was going, I was saying, I wonder what her motive is. This is the healthcare provider, or caregiver, the live-in caregiver. But the other part of me wanted to say, well, lots of times these are people that really do have strong relationships with people, and this patient, if she's of sound mind, might want to say, you are the person now to take care of my healthcare decisions. So I walked her through this just about an hour ago.
And make sure the person knows that you're there.
Well, that's a good point. And I told her this. I said, home health aide, the point is that you're going to give this to this individual. And I told her, use this document because this is one that can walk you through the next part. So it's naming the person, but then sit down together with that person and walk through the next 4 wishes. Because those 4 wishes talk about what kind of care you would want to receive if you got so sick that either you probably would never get better or you probably would never come out of a comatose state. And it goes through wish number 2, which is what life support means to me. So each individual can think of what life-sustaining treatment, what life support means, how they want to be cared for if they are closing in on the time of death, or if they're in a comatose state without a chance of recovery. And so I know it sounds hard, but these are important conversations, and it's important for the person who's going to be taking care of these decisions to kind of know what your values are and what these things mean for you as an individual. So that's kind of, the wish number 2 is kind of setting up what means the end. What sets up for this time when we're going to start focusing on one track or another. The 3rd wish talks about comfort. So you get to define what comfortable means for you. All of us have different ways of being comfortable. I even in the card deck we talked about dignity. I would love to know what dignity means. So sometimes it's different for different people as well. Which is wish 4. How do you want people to treat you? And then wish 5 kind of starts going into at the time of death and the post-mortem care. What kinds of things do you need your loved ones to know? So what kind of memorial or funeral service would be important? What kind of other personal tasks or personal issues need to be attended to? So you can see all of this living will is not about your estate, it's not about your finances, although the finances can come into it since the person you're going to select might be spending some of your money on healthcare. But this is about somebody making decisions and following your values and your wishes. The last part of the document is a signature. And so in almost every state, this form is valid. In New Jersey and in Pennsylvania, really all you need are 2 witnesses. I know in New Jersey you can also have an attorney or a notary sign it if you need to, but you don't need that. I know in Pennsylvania as well in New Jersey, just 2 witnesses will work.
But not the people that you name.
Exactly, Susan. So there is a caveat. Within the hospital context, you don't want to name your doctor or your nurses or your care providers as witnesses, just it's a conflict of interest. You don't want to name them as your proxies either, because that's a bit of a conflict of interest. But witnesses can be next door neighbor. I witness these in the hospital all the time for people. And what I'm witnessing is just that the individual who's completing this seems to be uncoerced, so they're clear-headed, and they understand the ramifications of what they're signing. So that's all I need to be aware of when I'm witnessing one of these documents. And as soon as it's witnessed by 2 individuals, it's a legal document. And we have a case already going on in the hospital where we have a woman who's now suffered her second of several strokes in the hospital, and there's family members who are each providing different advance directives. So we're having to figure out, what's going on with this family? She was living with one son, but another son lived down the road, and I kind of wondered what was going on there because I never saw the 2 sons in the room at the same time. So yeah, exactly. Ooh. So we're going to have to figure out which of the document is the one that is most current, and then that is the one that would be used. And you can see the drawback on some of this is that this is a document that really just starts once you get really sick. It doesn't prevent you from going to the hospital. It kicks in when you can no longer make choices for yourself. And it obviously kicks in when people present it to the people who are going to be providing care for you. So that can be a problem sometimes too, is that if families have these, but they never bring them to the hospital or to the care providers, they kind of keep them hidden away. So again, it's important that you name somebody that you know can follow through on this, and that you make copies of the document and give it to your care providers. Give it to your primary care physician, any other doctors you see, anytime you come to the hospital or anytime you get any procedure done, bring it along with you, bring a copy. I know at our hospital we scan it and it becomes part of your record, and so we have access to it at that point. The white document is basically the same thing, it's just a shorter version. You can imagine that a patient comes into the hospital pre-surgery and says, I never did finish my advance directive, I want to do it now. So the 20 minutes before they wheel them in and put them under, they say, can I sign my proxy and my advance directive? I don't really want to go through this and say, and what kind of music do you want at your funeral? That doesn't feel good right before your appendectomy. So I say, let's do this shorter one. Just because, again, it has my healthcare system's name on it. I think it still works on almost any place in the United States. But it really does things very quickly and succinctly. Again, first section is who do you want to make your choices for you? And the second part is what kind of care would you want to receive if you got so sick that you couldn't recover? And it really just suggests 2 paths. Yes, a shorter version. So either don't do all these things anymore or do everything possible. It gives a list or a little place of writing down a few things that might be important for people to know. It does ask if possible, would you want tissue or organs to be donated at the time of your death? And then signatures and witnesses. So it's really the same thing, it's just a lot shorter version. It doesn't go through the details of your funeral. The second document, any brief questions on that so far? Yes?
Regarding signatures, husband and wife will work, or are they considered one person?
Signatures as witnesses?
yeah.
I think just for clarification's sake, you wouldn't want someone you're married to be your witness. I mean, I guess it's technically possible, but,
Not married to, but friends, husband and wife.
oh yeah, sure,
Okay,
sure,
okay.
that should be fine.
With two different.
Yep, as long as they're two different people, they haven't just,
Okay.
yeah.
Not joined in the form.
Exactly. Not twinned in some way, shape, or form. Briefly, the other document I do want to tell you all about, in the packet it's green, that's the New Jersey color for this, what's called a POLST document. And in Pennsylvania, it's pink. This is not on the preferred cardstock nor the exact color, but it's close enough for what I had. But just to kind of keep your mind in what this document is, it's a one-page form, POLST. In New Jersey, it's called a practitioner order for life-sustaining therapy. Just so happens that Pennsylvania begins with a P, so it's now a Pennsylvania order for life-sustaining therapy. But POLST, it's part of a national movement, each state having a document like this. I call it the Keep Me Out of the ICU card, because this is a document that would be filled out by you and your physician and your advanced practice nurse or nurse practitioner or physician assistant. And it's a document that is a medical order. So as much as the first thing we're talking about is a legal document, this is legal, but it's also medical. So this really is like your doctor signing a prescription, but it's based on a conversation about what is important to you, what goals do you have in mind if you're medically fragile. So this really kicks in only for those folks who find themselves in a place, whether it's because of a really advanced age, infirmity, or disease, that they could maybe imagine, their doctor might be imagining that in 6 months they might no longer be living. This would be that type of document, yeah.
Not dementia.
So, potentially, sure, yep. So that could, yeah.
Your proxy can fill this out for
Correct.
you. One of the things that I tell people is to only fill this out when you have a pretty good idea what's going to kill you. Because if you've said, oh, I remember this person had this horrible journey and, I never want to be resuscitated, but then at the age of 45, you fall off your bicycle and get knocked out, you don't want somebody to whip out this piece of paper and say, oh, they
Yeah.
don't want to be resuscitated.
Correct.
So it really is used more at the end of life. And because it's a medical order, it is absolutely firm. Whereas the advance directive, because you've named somebody to be your proxy, that person can make a different decision based on the circumstances at the time.
Thank you, Susan, very correct. So it does seem a little complicated, but if you think about it, the advance directive is a document that helps, after the dust is settled, what would be important now that we might be at a place where we're having to make end-of-life decisions. Or you know the trajectory of whatever has happened to you might not be going in a good way. This is anticipating, because I'm medically fragile, and it could be at any age, and it can be signed by a proxy. It doesn't have to necessarily be signed by the individual themselves. What would be important given how I see my life, how I want the rest of my life to be? What kind of medical interventions would I not want or do want, given that state? In New Jersey, actually, the document starts with the goals of care, so it actually kind of drills down based on what is most important to me at this point. So for some people, it might be, I'm going to do my best to see my grandchildren graduate, in May, and they might have a 6 months, prognosis, at Christmas time. So, they really do want some maybe more aggressive care than others who say, you know what, at this point in my diagnosis and my prognosis, just let me stay at home. I don't want to ever go back to the hospital again. And you can list those kind of medical interventions and that you would want or not want on that document. It's part of a dialogue with your physician or your healthcare provider. It is a medical order. It gets signed by both of you, and anyone who this is presented to has to follow it. Suggest that if you're at home, it works at home, the EMTs would find it or see it, and hopefully it's either on your bedstand or on your refrigerator or someone very public. So if EMTs ever get called to your home, they need to follow this.
I've been told that in Pennsylvania, the EMTs do not have to.
Well, in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, they do. The New Jersey law, they do.
In New Jersey,
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you for letting me know that. But yeah, and so yeah, get sick in New Jersey.
Would it be worthwhile to have a blank copy of this with your proxies, 5 wishes?
I think, if you were at a point in your life where you're that medically fragile, that would be great to have all of that going over together and probably have your proxy with you at that doctor's appointment so that you're having that conversation all together. That would be ideal. So we all kind of know what's most important to you. Because there are families that get scared when things happen. Your breathing slows down. Your heart begins to stop. People get scared and they don't follow what we talked about before and the EMTs come. The other place this works anywhere. It is portable. So it means at your home, in the nursing home, in rehab, in the hospital, on the way between any of those places, we're supposed to follow it. And if it's presented to us, we are supposed to follow it. And we will, it is reciprocal between the states, and most states in this part of the country do have these, and we follow them. So if someone is visiting from New York and brings this to the hospital at St. Mary, they're going to still follow it. So we're about that halfway mark. I wanted just to have dialogue. So open up to some of the questions that might come up and perk up with some of this. I also had some information in here that if we need to get to that, talks about other things, kind of post-mortem issues that you can think of ahead of time. But I wanted to give you, these are the 2 big ones that really have to deal with, while I'm living, what's most important for me. And I do want to say this before we take questions, just to remind, and Susan was so good at saying this, the advance directive, I would hope all of us do that, whether it's the 5 wishes or anything else you can download. You just Google Advanced Directive Pennsylvania and it'll come up.
Anybody over the age of
18, because you never know what's going to happen between coming out the door here and me going back home. That some medical catastrophe could happen, and I'd want people to take care of me the way I'd want to be taken care of. The pulse document's only if you're medically fragile. You think ahead of time, okay, as this disease progresses, what do I or I don't want? Okay, so some questions, and I'll try to do my best to be medical. I'm a chaplain, not a doctor, so I sound like
I'm a social worker, not a doctor.
Right.
But I want to put in a plug, because I think the other part of this is to have the conversation.
Yeah.
And that is, don't just fill out the paper and check, I want. Talk to the people. And this is not one 10-minute conversation. This may happen over time. Or if you have family members who are aging, you may need to approach it several times. But you take an example like, Uncle Harry just had a stroke. And I'm wondering what you would want to do if you had a stroke. But have that conversation. This book is called The Conversation by Angela Volandes. It's a good walkthrough. Also, Being Mortal is a good book to look at around these issues. So I just want to put in a plug for that.
Thanks.
But
and the other thing is to have that conversation with your healthcare providers, which is not always easy. Believe it or not, our docs and don't always want to talk about this. And I think sometimes for the reason that they care about us, and it's hard for them to imagine us getting sick and leaving their practice. And the other thing...
And for some of them, it indicates they've failed.
Yes, that was the other thing. I think, many of them in their medical formation, advanced illness and death is a failure. And they haven't done everything they can for you. So sometimes the default is just to keep on doing more and more. And so it's helpful to have the conversation both together and sometimes bring it up to your doctor before they bring it up to you to say, hey, these things are important to me. Let's start planning for that.
So as we do questions and answers, Ted, if you could just repeat the questions
Sure.
so that we make sure that we
It's on tape.
pick it up. And then at some point, I know we wanted to turn off the video. So let's just go for a couple of informational questions first, and then we'll turn that off. And
You can do
we
personal
get more
questions.
Just a sharing
Yeah.
question. My physician, that practice made known that they would have these kind of discussions with not necessarily your own doctor, but somebody else in the practice, and that it was covered by Medicare.
It is.
So that's useful to know.
So some doctors still don't realize, but there is a code that they can bill Medicare for to have that conversation. So it's not,
So they had a kind of a informational session, and then they said, please, anybody seeing any of the doctors in this practice, you can make an appointment, and that will be covered.
Sure.
So you have deeper and more personal questions.
I've also always been an advocate that you're welcome to have conversations with your clergy, with your chaplain, with your social worker. We can't complete the post form, but there are often a lot of questions that people have before that point, and you can talk with someone who has more time maybe than your doctor does, and then go into that session, that one paid session prepared.
right. So just to reiterate, Medicare does provide reimbursement for physicians and practitioners to have these kind of conversations, to complete these documents. And again, I have sat down with many families to go over the material. And again, I'm not giving advice, I'm just saying this is what this is about, making sure that they're kind of clear about what they're indicating on the documentation. And with a post form, I then say you need to complete this conversation with your practitioner, whoever's signing this. And with the advance directive, I sometimes then witness it or find other witnesses for them. Okay.
Beyond the advance directives, are there other documents that you would recommend every person have?
So the one other thing it's good to see you, by the way. So what other documents might you want to have? Yes, what other documents might you want to have? To me, the other really important document would be on your driver's license, is to indicate whether you are an organ donor or not. I hope all of you give serious consideration on potentially being organ or tissue donor. My mom, at age 80 when she died, was able to donate skin. So it is a very particular way you need to die to be an organ donor, but if you are able to do that, it's an amazing gift. And tissue donors can help up to 60 to 80 people with different tissues that can be donated. Eyes, bone, saphenous veins, skin can all be donated and then distributed to a lot of different people to help their lives.
I'm somebody who has chosen to donate my body to medical science. And I'm told that if I choose to do that and I am an organ donor, they will not take it. So that under those circumstances, you need to not be an organ donor.
So yeah, so the question about what type of donation do you want to follow up with? I'm also a whole body donor, but if I had the opportunity to offer organ donation, which is again a very particular way of giving that help, which means I would have to die in a hospital on a ventilator with either full brain death or very severe neurological impairment. So God help me, I hope I don't go that way. But yes, so if I'm going to be an organ donor, then usually the anatomical associations might not take my body. Depends on which anatomical association, which medical school. Because some of them will use parts of bodies to help teach physicians. So it might be worth saying, okay, if one anatomical association will not take it, you could maybe register in others. So that's something maybe to do some exploration about. In this packet, just again, because I'm from New Jersey, also because I work with the RWJ Barnabas Health System, which is part of and aligned with Rutgers. The Rutgers Medical School is listed in here. So I give them a plug and say, and that's where my body is, where I'm registered. And so I'm a donor, an anatomical donor that way.
It's Humanity Gifts Registry if you're a Pennsylvania resident, and that is 5 or 6 medical centers in Philadelphia. Hahnemann, Penn,
Not
Jefferson.
Jonathan anymore.
Uh-huh.
That's right. Yeah.
And there was also a dental school I was intrigued by, so that may be a part.
Yeah.
We went to the Celebration of Life last
What is the name of the organization again?
Humanity Gifts Registry.
Humanity Gifts Registry.
And believe me, it made things so easy.
Yeah. So and sometimes there are families that do not have resources to help bury or take care of the final disposition of their loved one's body. And, for some of them, it is a very wonderful way of giving forward by doing anatomical donation, and it's much less expensive. People who are dealing with that at the end of life. Yes?
This is one better than the other?
Is one what?
Is one, my whole body or parts of it? I know what some people would say.
So for me, I'm going to tell you about my values, and having been part of organ donation processes, I think the ability, and it's rare, but when it happens, the ability for someone to give organs is pretty amazing, and it lets people who are waiting have access to an extended life. So I think, but I also value medical education. And so I want to think that even as much as I'm teaching now, after I'm gone, I can still teach for a little while longer and be part of education, letting my body do the teaching. So, but for me, yes, I think if I could ever be an organ donor, that would be pretty cool. Yeah.
The thing about organ donating, is there like a time limit? I mean, do you have to be dead like 3 minutes?
So the way, in brief, organ donation again is rare. Maybe 1% of the people who die in the United States could actually be an organ donor because could be, because you have to die in a hospital on a ventilator. The idea being that your organs are being perfused with oxygen, so the organs are alive even though you are dead or almost dead. So there's two ways of potentially being an organ donor. One is if you were declared brain dead, meaning that there is no brain function, and so legally death is declared by cessation of brain function. It's hard to see these people because they're on ventilators and they're warm and their chests are rising up and down and they kind of look like they're asleep on a machine, but they are declared brain dead. And at that point, if you've already declared yourself to be an organ donor, there'll be a process in place to see if they're, how you match and if you are able, barring any other issues with disease in your body, to be able to donate to people. The other way is if you have such brain injury that you might not be able to survive more than 30 minutes off of a ventilator. So you're not brain dead. You got a little bit left, but not enough to have meaningful life. And at that point, families or the proxy who you've decided to help make decisions for you would remove you from life support. And that would be done within an operating room. And within 30 minutes, if your cardiovascular system stops in 30 minutes, you can donate kidneys. Kidneys are a little bit more robust, and they can deal with not having as much oxygen for a little bit of time and still be used as donated kidneys. Yeah.
So therefore, hospice people.
Hospice patients don't become organ donors.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they can do their bodies.
Sure.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Again, it's very rare to be an organ donor. It used to be most organ donors were motorcycle drivers or car accident victims, and with helmet laws, that changed some. Most organ donors are now opioid overdoses.
Wow.
So the ones I've seen have usually been young men in their 30s who tragically overdosed and became brain dead after the overdose.
Yeah. This is the time now, or building at another appropriate time. You mentioned the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a thorny issue I'm involved in now with my brother's end of life, end-stage heart failure. Doesn't want to have the conversation.
Right.
So do you have recommendations where the person does not wish to have the conversation?
Yeah. So the question is about those who might be facing end of life and are beloved, and those beloved around them want to know what to do, and yet the individual is not willing to enter into a conversation about end-of-life decision-making, if I can paraphrase what you're saying. I don't know. I mean, as a chaplain, I want to honor the way people do their lives, and if denial is the way that they get through their life, then maybe that's just the way they're going to get through their life. Although I can see the family members struggling and suffering through that as well. Sometimes there could be gentle entries into the conversation of just acknowledging that, you know, this might be not something we want to talk about, but just you could say something like, just so you're aware, this is setting hard on me, or this is heavy on me. And if there ever is a time where we want to have that conversation, no, I'm open to it at any point. But, so not putting people on a guilt trip, I'd hate to go down that road, but to let people at least know that their decision not to make a decision in the house has ramifications. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I'm very much of letting people live their lives and live their dying the way they want to do it, but I also see that can really be rough for the people that love them. And that happens in the hospital a lot, you know. Yeah.
That attitude does show a lot of trust in the people that love them.
Well, I mean, so the idea is that can show trust in the people that surround you with love. But yeah, I guess trust, because you are just basically saying, when I can no longer speak for myself, someone's going to have to, and yeah.
I was just going to comment on that. In a family from my synagogue that I belong to, the mom had terminal cancer finally, and she was at home, and each of us from the synagogue would go and spend X number of hours at the bedside towards the very end. They did have a hospice connection, and I highly recommend having a hospice connection, because I happened to be the one when it was at the very end, and I was alone, and things started to go in a difficult way, and she shouldn't go to the hospital, but I called the hospice, which was not called very often. The lady came, one of the nurses came, and she said, okay, things are difficult, I'll take care of it in terms of what medications to offer. So all of that has to be involved, because just sitting at home with your relatives, if they don't know anything about what to do, and you don't want just hospice, you want a hospice that's, you call and within a half an hour they're there.
Yeah, so the discussion here is about hospice, and Susan, maybe you want to say something about that?
I was just going to say, can you talk a little bit about hospice and palliative care?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know,
So-
what Valerie was talking about people don't want to have that conversation. It's kind of, people sometimes feel like if I have this conversation, I'm accepting that I'm dying. If I
Right. have
this conversation, if I agree to go on hospice, it means I've given up. So, but there's a lot of confusion right now about hospice.
Right. There are, palliative care is kind of the big umbrella idea of supportive care. It's the type of care, medicine, that focuses on suffering and alleviating suffering. So not causing it, but alleviating it. And a lot of the focus then in a palliative care paradigm is doing just what we're talking about doing right now, is thinking ahead. What would be important? What are your values? What are your goals? If you're being treated for a chronic, systemic, and worsening condition, if the treatments are causing suffering, how do we alleviate that suffering? So sometimes it involves medication, sometimes it involves social work to help clear up some issues that are going on in family dynamics or in resource allocation. Sometimes there's a lot of spiritual pain, and so chaplains and spiritual care providers can be part of a team-based approach. So palliative care is this idea, broad scope. Sometimes it's called supportive care. The names are changing now in our world. Hospice is a particular subset of that palliative care paradigm. It's a Medicare benefit, and other private insurance also picks it up. You need to have a 6-month prognosis. So a physician, actually 2 docs, have to sign off saying, in our best estimate, 6 months from now, this person will no longer be alive. And then the hospice benefit kicks in. And it usually kicks in with home care. Norm was talking about that, where people stay at home and they receive all kinds of support at home. So durable medical equipment, medications that focus on alleviating suffering. They don't fix the terminal illness, because that's been determined can't be fixed, but it can fix issues of suffering. And then that whole team actually can come to the home. Social workers, chaplains, there's pharmacy consults involved, sometimes PT consults, sometimes music therapy, massage therapy, aromatherapy. I mean, it's just this whole kind of gathering, and it includes sometimes, and most often at home, personal care. So someone will come in several times a week, just do some of the personal care around you. That alleviates a lot of the stress on the family. There is an option for people who are having intractable symptoms that just can't be managed at home for inpatient hospice care. So that's kind of where you have to have 24/7 nursing coverage to manage people's symptoms at end of life. And then sometimes there's a respite involved, or if there's something happening at home and there's a way to get the whole team there for about 24 hours to focus on things. And home can be any private home or assisted living or even a nursing home. So that's kind of how that works. There was a question back here.
Yeah, you had opened up something that I was suppressing, and that is, forgive me if I start crying about this, your brother won't talk about it. And I've had that experience almost 3 times now. And this is good stuff for people that will face.
Mm-hmm.
You know. There are other people on the other side, like us, and it is wrenching. My mother would not talk about it.
Yeah.
You know, she would not. And it was really difficult. And at that point, everybody in my family backed away.
Yeah.
They, you know, it just scared them, and they just backed away. So I'm just thinking about the difficulty of not facing truth. And I don't know if anything can be built into the mechanism that you're talking about those people that are just shut out.
And I appreciate what you're saying. So just kind of, again, echoing this idea that how difficult it is when an individual is not able, for whatever reason, to face these decisions and not able to give the people that love them any direction onto how to care for them. And sometimes that is culturally based too. There are some cultures that tend not to have conversations around death. That if you talk about it, then it might mean that you're bringing it on faster. So we just don't say it. And I get that. There's other cultures that have had rocky relationships with the medical care system anyway. So even engaging ideas about not doing something full steam ahead and giving all the technology you can feels a little frightening or distressing. So we're not going to go down that road. So I can appreciate it, and I can appreciate the heart-wrenching place where we, who love them, want them to do something different than what they're doing. And I guess maybe the bit of the Buddhist practice in me would say, can I detach from me wanting them to be different than who they are? Can I let them be who they are? And maybe let them have a death that I wouldn't want, but tacitly they have chosen by not choosing. And so it's going to be my work is to be okay with that. And I can see that in the hospital that happens a lot. A lot of the care providers have what's called moral distress. We see people making choices that we would never make. People in the ICU, little 95-year-old women who no one has ever thought of this before, intubated, end-stage dementia, and we're resuscitating. We are pounding on their chest, breaking ribs. As that's happening. It's a pretty violent experience, and everybody hates it. And I spend a lot of time talking to our nurses and doctors afterwards, just helping them process something they have a hard time seeing and experiencing because they would never want that on anyone. But no one ever thought about it, and no one made a choice. So here we go, full steam ahead. And I just have to pull back and say, you also know that people, by not making choices, made a choice. Going around.
I was about to say I've been lucky to be with 3 people at the time of their death. I'm not so sure that it was lucky, but at least 2 of them were very meaningful and very positive. One person same age as me, 15, almost 20 years ago maybe, and family members were around her, sick for a very, very long time. And to this day, I have no idea whether any of us knew what her wishes were. And till the last day of her life, she was prodded and poked, and she was in pain, and nobody was doing anything.
Right.
Until the nurses and doctors realized it was no good, and they just walked away and left us there. The second one was my mother, an at-home hospice, where I was on the phone with somebody every single minute telling me, is that happening now? Is this, did you see this? And I knew exactly what was going on. That was amazing. The third one was my uncle, who was brought to a really lousy hospital in New York. And I said, oh, this is going to be really, really bad. And he was near the end of his life, and they put him in the emergency room in a quiet corner. People came and visited us, said, how's it going, what's happening? Brought us to a private room. 2 different ministers came and prayed with the family. It was, and they were end-of-life people who knew how to do this well.
Yeah.
And it was a blessing.
So, yeah, so even in an institutional setting, there can sometimes be some pretty amazing end-of-life experiences that focus on dignity and comfort.
Yes,
So thankfully, that experience, just like in a hospice experience, somebody was there to guide you and to be aware what might be needed and to companion you in that part of that journey. And I'm really sorry about that other experience where, that's sometimes, like I'm saying, the medical system has its own way. And, you kind of get on the train, and when the train can no longer go, everyone just kind of jumps off and leaves us there hanging, like, what do we do now? So there might be time for one more question, Susan?
I was just going to say, maybe we can shift into the
More personal?
and private.
Sure.
And to say thank you so much for your sharing your wisdom.
You're welcome.
But that maybe we'll turn off the video and...
Yeah. So I'm not going to